So you and your team have just spent months putting together an intranet site with all the information that the rest of your business needs so that you and your team don't get hassled all the time. The only issue is no one's using it and they're still coming directly to you. Well, in this video, I'm going to be talking about the 4 reasons why no one is using your information. So there's a number of reasons why your information may not be well received. The number one underlying cause of that is generally when people haven't considered their audience. I've already made a video of that and I will link it up there so you can go and have a look at that if you haven't yet. In this video though, I want to talk specifically about the information and the way you provide it that is making it confusing and hard for people to find what they're looking for. So the number one reason and the most common thing I see in my work is providing way too much information in one hit. So there's 2 reasons you might do this. On the one hand, you may actually need to provide all that information to people. On the other, it may be that you don't need to provide all that information, but you're so close to it that you feel like every single piece of information is important and needs to be communicated. So I'm going to start with this one because this tends to be what happens. It can also be a bit of a combination of both as well, of course. When you provide or over provide information and not everything is critical, it not only will confuse your audience, but it also dilutes the point of your communication or your information, because providing too much is just going to overwhelm people. And it's going to mean those really critical points you want people to know, they may not read, they may not, actually kind of remember because you've just overloaded them with too much information. So if you're in this bucket, and I would suggest that most subject matter experts, managers, anyone with a really detailed view of what they're trying to get across will struggle with this. So the number one thing you can probably do is get help from a communications expert, because they're going to be able to tease out what's critical and what isn't. Now, obviously, if you go down this path, it's really important that you listen to them and are guided by them. So this may not always be the case. So if you aren't able to get a communication expert, the next thing I suggest you do is to think about all your information and cut down to the 3 most critical things that you want your audience to take out of everything. Then question every other piece of information. Is it important? Is it critical? What will happen if they don't get this information? So I'm not saying you need to discard everything, but by identifying those really critical pieces, you'll be able to have a reference point of whether that other information is actually relevant. If you're still struggling at this point, think about that less relevant information from 2 perspectives. First of all, what would happen if your audience didn't get that information? Is it actually going to make a big difference, or is it more of a nice to have? And conversely to that, what would happen if your audience remembered that information but didn't actually connect or remember those really important points you first came up with, those 3 important points? So by looking at it from both perspectives, it'll tease out what is really critical. So that was the second bucket, where you are, and probably most likely, providing too much information to your audience and not all of it is completely necessary. Once you've actually cut down to everything they definitely need, if you've still got a heap of information, that's when you need to start thinking about the mode. So how you provide that information, how you lay out that information and format it. That's going to make it easier to find critical points and skim information. Think about chunking down your information and using visuals like headers and other formatting options so that the information isn't completely overwhelming in one hit. So for example, if we take that intranet page I spoke about at the start, you're not going to just dump all information in. There might be 3 key points that you want people to know about, and you'll provide like a little overview, and then when you click into them, it provides more context. So that is the issue with providing too much information. The second issue I see is not providing enough information. So this sort of ironically happens for the same reason. You're too close to the information. A lot of it's just automatic to you, so you don't actually know that you're missing information. So in that case, it's really good to do similar to what I mentioned above, and that is to set clear expectations around what you want people to actually get out of this information. You know, do you want them to remember something? Do you want them to be able to find something? Do you want them to do something post that? And then get a group of your audience to actually go through that information and test whether that's actually doing what you want it to do. Are they actually remembering what you want? Do they know how to find the information easily? And by testing that, you'll be able to see whether there's gaps in your information. Not providing enough information also tends to align with you not really understanding your audience. So in that case, I would really recommend, as I said at the start, watching my video, which talks about understanding your audience a bit more, because if you don't have a good understanding of them and their perspective and where they're coming from, you're probably going to be unaware of what information they truly need. The third reason is that you haven't provided the information that they need or want. So you're not providing the right type of information. So this again really links to you knowing your audience. However, I do find that it is also because there may be some contentious or controversial answers that you don't want to provide people. I've worked on a number of projects where there are certain things that we just don't want our audience to know, at least not at this point in time. I find this happens particularly with things like frequently asked questions. You know, you tend to bundle up everything you've already communicated or trained people on, stuff they already know, and those really, controversial political questions don't get answered because, the sponsor or someone in your area aren't comfortable answering those questions. So these cases tend to be political and are very dependent on your situation. So my recommendation is to just be really clear with what you're providing and why you're providing it. So if, for example, with my example around FAQs, if you're providing them all the information they've already got, do you need FAQs? If there's going to be like this elephant in the room that you're not answering, I would say no. In cases where there are things that you will be able to communicate to people at a later stage, but you don't necessarily have the answers now, it's better to just be upfront and give them some time frames so that they know it's coming. Remember, communication is all about building trust. So the more honest you can be, within the boundaries that you have, the better and the more trust that you will build. And the fourth biggest issue I find with information is too much jargon and complex language. I think almost everyone is guilty of this. And it's kind of for similar reasons, right? You are so close to that information, to you it's automatic, but really knowing your audience is going to be important here because not everyone's going to know the same jargon as you. And I would suggest in general, you should try and avoid it anyway, even if they are across it, because jargon is one of those things that people have their own interpretation of. So even though you might think they know what this means, it may be interpreted in a different way that you want. So what can be a really good idea to make sure that you are not adding jargon in your communication is to actually have it reviewed by someone either outside your team that will come to it with a different view and perspective and be able to pick up where things just make no sense at all or are confusing. So I lied to you. There's actually 5 reasons. I don't know if you picked that up, but the 5th reason is outdated and conflicting information. So I think we've all experienced this in the workplace. You go to multiple sites that has completely different information and you're not sure what's correct. So this happens for a number of reasons. I think the number one reason is lack of ownership of information. So information gets created at some point in time. No one is truly owns that information or is responsible for keeping it updated. And so it just gets outdated or just randomly updated on occasion. So that is the number one reason. The second one is just a lack of a information maintenance schedule. So this goes hand in hand with an owner. If you have an owner, they can actually plan out when that information gets updated. If there's no owner, then it's kind of a bit of a all over the place. It may get updated, it may not. Another reason is the lack of a single source of truth. So the aim should always be to have your information in one central spot. This isn't always ideal. Sometimes information is repeated across different, modes, and that's fine, but it does add complexity. And again, if you don't have an owner that understands that that information is in multiple spots and has a plan for maintenance ongoing for all of those spots where the information is contained, it can get outdated really quickly. Another reason is just this pace of change in companies. Information gets outdated really quickly, and if you don't have someone owning it and maintaining it, it can become outdated like overnight. And the last reason that I see this happening often is this constant search for the ideal or perfect solution. So I will always advocate for really good processes, systems, and tools, but this idea that there's always a better option isn't necessarily true. But what happens is often teams come along and they're like, that wasn't working, having information on the intranet wasn't working, so we're going to create a Teams channel, etc., etc. And so you start to get information duplicated over different platforms, different tools, and different areas, and it is not going to be updated across all of it, and you're going to start to get really outdated information, duplicated information, and confusing your audience pretty quickly. So while you need to think long term about what's your ideal solution, I think there also needs to be a level of acceptance that there's no perfect solution, and you just need to work out what sort of system and process is going to be best, what's going to work best for you. So that's quite a lot to take in, but essentially the things I would recommend is for any piece of information, you, number one, have an owner. Number two, they are responsible for updating and having a consistent maintenance schedule to ensure that information keeps updated. And third, wherever possible, try and keep to a single source of truth, or through your maintenance schedule, have it documented where information is duplicated in different areas. So those three things alone are going to really improve your information, ensuring that it isn't duplicated and outdated really quickly. So next time you have to provide information to others, make sure that that information is the right information, the right amount of information, that it hasn't got complex language and jargon all the way through it, and that there's an actual owner that's going to be responsible for maintaining that information and keeping it up to date. So I hope that helped. If you have any tips of your own, please add them to the comments below. And as always, if you are interested in hearing about ways that you can manage all your information and communications, make sure you subscribe to my channel.